They say a mother's love is unconditional until it's mistaken for entitlement. When my daughter called and said, "Jonah and I were thinking, you don't really need your apartment, do you?" Something inside me broke. They wanted my home, my sanctuary, the place I built after losing everything, including her father. So I sold it, and then I cut them out of my will. You won't believe what happened next, but every word is true. Before we begin, subscribe for more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable. Now let me tell you how I took my life back. Piece by piece. The call came on a Tuesday, but the fallout felt like it had been building for years. I had just come in from the balcony, arms full of laundry that smelled like sun and salt. My little apartment was quiet, filled with the soft hum of the city outside and the faint tick of the kitchen clock, a rhythm I'd grown to cherish in my solitude. This place wasn't large, but it was mine. Every chipped tile and mismatched photo frame told a story. Stories I had written alone, one quiet year at a time. My phone rang as I was folding a towel. Olivia's name lit up the screen, and without thinking, I smiled. No matter how strained things had become, no matter how rare her calls were these days, something in me always lit up when I saw her name. The habit of hope, I suppose. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was cheerful, too cheerful. Olivia only sounded that way when she was nervous or rehearsing something. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, my hand stilling on the folded towel. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, just a second, but I caught it. "Yeah, I just wanted to run something by you. Jonah and I were talking the other night. He's doing so well at the firm, and we're finally ready to start thinking seriously about kids." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "That's wonderful, Liv." "And we're kind of at a crossroads," she continued. "We've been trying to find a bigger place, something near the park, close to where you are, actually." My stomach fluttered. She never talked about wanting to be close to me. That alone should have been a red flag. "We were thinking," she said, drawing it out like she was easing into cold water, "that maybe it's time for you to downsize. I mean, you're alone now, Mom. That apartment is a bit much for just you, isn't it?" I blinked. My apartment wasn't a palace. It was a modest 2-bedroom, 1 bath, with a creaky balcony and peeling paint in the hallway. But it was filled with history. With Tom's laugh still caught between the walls, with birthday candle wax stuck in the cracks of the dining table, with Olivia's childhood scribbles still barely visible on the inside of the linen closet door. "I don't know," I said slowly. "I like it here. Everything I need is right around the corner." "Exactly," she jumped in. "Which is why it would be perfect for us. You've already done the hard part. This place is rent-controlled, stable, safe. We could finally start our family without the stress of a mortgage." I didn't answer right away. She took my silence as encouragement. "I mean, it's just logical. You could move into something smaller, maybe a nice senior living condo. They're really modern now, Mom. You'd love the amenities, and we'd take good care of the place. We wouldn't change much." She paused. Then came the smile I could hear over the phone, the one she used to get her way as a child. "Come on. You've always said your dream was to see me happy. Well, this would really help." I looked around the apartment. The dusty corners, the crooked frames, the sun-dappled rug. My life, my history, the only place that had held me when no one else had. Something hot twisted in my chest. Not quite anger. Not yet. "You want me to give you my apartment," I said flatly. She laughed, like I was being silly. "Not give. Just hand it over legally. You'd be taken care of course. Jonah has already spoken to someone about drafting the paperwork. It wouldn't be a big deal." I sat down on the edge of my bed, the towel still clutched in my hands. Olivia, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. This apartment isn't just a place. It's my home. I know, but Mom, think of the bigger picture. You're not using the space. We are. We have plans, dreams, a future. Her words were like frost creeping across glass. Clear. Cold. And I don't? I asked quietly. I don't have a future? There was silence. And then, as if she hadn't heard me, she pressed on. We'll cover moving costs. Jonah says we can even handle your first few months' rent at the new place. It's not like we're asking for a handout. This is just what makes sense. I hung up soon after. Politely. Coolly. I told her I needed to think. And I did. I thought about every late-night shift I took to make ends meet when Tom died. About every school project I stayed up helping her with. Every fever I soothed. Every prom dress I altered with aching fingers and cheap thread. I thought about the way she used to crawl into bed beside me when the nightmares came and whisper, "Don't ever leave me, Mommy." Now she wanted my apartment, not my company, not my stories, just my space, my sacrifice, repackaged as opportunity. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the city breathe. Neon lights blinked like tired eyes. A siren wailed somewhere far off. And I realized that this wasn't about square footage. It was about something deeper. I had become a stepping stone, a placeholder, a resource. She hadn't asked what the apartment meant to me. She hadn't even asked if I was happy. No, Olivia hadn't just requested my apartment. She had, in the kindest tone possible, asked me to vanish. And that was the night I decided. If I was going to leave this place, I'd be the one holding the pen. Not her. Not Jonah. Me. And the story I was about to write would be the one no one saw coming. The next morning, I made coffee the way I always had. 2 scoops, a pinch of cinnamon, 1 slow exhale while it brewed. But it didn't taste the same. The kitchen felt different. Not smaller exactly, but tense, like it had been listening to everything I hadn't said out loud the night before. I moved through my morning rituals on autopilot, watered the plants, opened the windows, brushed the cat. All the small acts of care I'd stitched into the fabric of my life since Tom passed. They used to comfort me, ground me. But now, they felt performative, like I was playing a role in a story someone else had already decided to end. Olivia didn't call. I wasn't surprised. She had likely assumed silence meant submission. That I was mulling over their offer, talking myself into the idea like a reasonable woman should. That I'd come around, as I always had. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't throw anything or scream. I'd learned long ago that grief doesn't always shout. It seeps. It whispers in the quiet, in the pause between coffee sips, in the way your hand lingers too long on a doorknob. By afternoon, I had done something I never thought I would. I called a real estate agent. "Hi, I'm thinking of selling," I said, almost casually, like I was asking about the weather. "Great," the woman chirped. "Tell me a little about the property." So I did. 2 bedrooms, top floor, older building, but full of charm. Good bones. I didn't mention the memories, or the daughter-shaped hole starting to spread in the middle of my chest. We scheduled a walkthrough for Friday. Her name was Jenna. She sounded young, ambitious, the kind of person Olivia might respect. After I hung up, I sat on the couch for a long time. The afternoon sun moved slowly across the floor, touching the edge of the rug where Tom used to sit and tie his shoes. I wondered if Olivia remembered him anymore. Not the stories, not the facts, the real him. The way he used to hold her so gently, like she was something holy. I stood and opened the hallway closet. Inside were boxes, holiday decorations, old papers, shoeboxes full of photographs. I pulled one down and opened the lid. There she was. 4 years old, frosting on her cheeks, sitting in a fort we built from blankets and broomsticks. There we were, all three of us, squinting into the sun at a county fair. Tom's arm around me, his other hand holding hers. I couldn't look at it long. I closed the box and set it aside. I'd sort through them later. Or maybe not at all. On Friday, Jenna arrived precisely at 10. She wore sharp heels and red lipstick and carried a tablet she used like a shield. She walked through the apartment with fast eyes, calculating things I couldn't see. "It has great light," she said, "and the neighborhood's trending. This will go fast." I nodded. My mouth was dry. As she scribbled notes and snapped photos, I tried to see my apartment the way she did. Square footage, fixtures, ROI. But all I saw were ghosts. Tom reading the paper by the window. Olivia learning to braid on the shaggy throw rug in the corner. Me, crying quietly into a towel the night I realized no one was coming to help. "Do you have a timeline in mind?" Jenna asked, tapping her screen. "Yes," I said. "Soon." The next call I made was to my lawyer. His name was Carl, and he'd handled everything after Tom's death. Kind, efficient, used to women who had done everything themselves for too long. "I need to change my will," I told him. There was a pause. "All right. Who's your current beneficiary?" "My daughter, Olivia. I'd like to remove her." I expected him to ask questions. He didn't. "And who would you like to name instead?" "I'll be creating a scholarship fund," I said. "Something for women over 50 who are starting over, divorced, widowed, forgotten." There was another pause, but this one felt softer. "That's a fine idea, Susan. I'll draw up the paperwork." When the documents arrived a week later, I didn't hesitate. I signed with a steady hand, sealing something I couldn't yet name. That night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine and listened to the city. The hum of traffic, laughter drifting up from the sidewalk below. Somewhere, a dog barked. The air smelled like jasmine and concrete. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. Inside, my phone buzzed. Olivia. The text was short. "Hey, just checking in. Did you think about what we talked about?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. Then I turned the phone over and placed it face down on the table. I wasn't ready to answer her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, I sipped my wine, looked out into the night, and began, quietly, defiantly, to imagine a life that didn't revolve around being useful. A life that belonged only to me. The apartment sold in 12 days. 12 days from listing to handshake, from polished hardwood photos on a real estate site, to a firm offer that exceeded asking. Jenna was right. The neighborhood was trending, the light was perfect, and the buyer didn't blink. A single woman in her 40s, no kids, quiet demeanor. She wore silver rings on every finger and spoke to my cat like they were old friends. I liked her instantly. As she signed the papers, she said, "You've taken good care of this place. It feels lived in, but gently." That was one way of putting it. This apartment had held my grief, my joy, my exhaustion, my triumphs. It had absorbed them all without complaint. And now it would be hers. I didn't tell Olivia. I wasn't hiding it exactly. I just wanted to see what she would say when she found out. I was curious how long it would take before she noticed that the apartment she thought she deserved was gone. The morning after the sale closed, I sat in the empty living room and stared at the bare walls. Everything had already been packed and stored, or given away. I kept only what I needed: clothes, photos, a box of letters, and the small lamp Tom had brought home from the flea market the year we couldn't afford anything new. The light it gave off was soft and golden, like it understood hardship and offered comfort in return. A truck was scheduled to arrive by noon to take the last of the boxes to my new condo. Smaller, simpler, just mine. At 10:13 a.m., Olivia called again. "Hey," she said, breathless. "I just tried to swing by. I thought maybe we could talk in person. There's a strange woman in your apartment." I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window, at the skyline I'd watched for more than 2 decades, now just a view someone else would wake up to. "I sold it," I said. There was silence on the line. I imagined her blinking, confused, trying to match the reality of what she'd just heard to the version of events she had already written in her mind. "You what?" "I sold the apartment," I repeated quietly, like I was saying a prayer. "It closed yesterday." "You didn't even tell me?" "You didn't ask," I said. "You didn't ask how I felt. You told me what you wanted." "But you knew we were planning to move in. Jonah's already told people. We've had conversations about logistics." "You told me what you decided," I said. "You never asked if I was okay with it. That apartment is mine, was mine, and I get to choose where I live, not you, not Jonah." Her voice cracked. "This is unbelievable." "You're right," I said. "It is." "You knew we were counting on that place." "I was counting on you to be my daughter," I said softly. "But here we are." She hung up. I didn't cry. Not then. I think I'd moved past tears. Some wounds just settle in. They stop bleeding, but they don't really heal. You just learn to walk around them. The moving truck arrived on time. The driver was young and polite, and had the decency not to make conversation while I watched strangers carry out the last traces of my old life. They were quick, efficient, and in 40 minutes, the apartment was empty. I did one last sweep, touching the wall by the kitchen where Olivia had taken her first steps. I whispered goodbye, not to the apartment, but to the years I had spent waiting to feel appreciated inside it. When I stepped into the condo later that afternoon, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the kind that echoes, but the kind that waits. It didn't feel like home yet, but it didn't feel like a mistake either. It felt possible. Carol came by with wine and takeout. She kicked off her shoes and plopped onto my couch like we'd lived here for years. "So," she said, passing me a plastic fork. "How's the view from the high road?" "Lonely," I admitted. "Better lonely than used." "I think I wanted her to fight for me," I said finally. Carol nodded, chewing. "But she thought she'd already won." That night, I lay in bed and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. The streetlight outside cast a new kind of shadow on the wall. It looked like a tree branch, or maybe a hand reaching. I wasn't sure which. My phone buzzed again. Olivia. "You've made your point. I hope you're happy." I turned off the screen. I wasn't happy, but I was done. The first morning in the new condo felt like waking up in someone else's life. The sheets were still stiff from the packaging, the walls bare except for a single frame I'd brought. Tom holding Olivia at her 5th birthday party, frosting in both their hair. I'd hung it the night before, the only thing I unpacked with care. Everything else stayed in boxes, stacked like silent reminders that I had started over. Again. I sat at the small kitchen island, a cup of coffee between my palms, watching steam rise in the quiet. No city traffic outside my window now, just the occasional chirp of a bird, the sound of someone else's dog barking in the distance. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like I was waiting for something to arrive. Grief, maybe, or guilt. Or the kind of anger that comes dressed like regret. I kept checking my phone, as if Olivia might realize something she hadn't before. As if she might apologize. As if she might remember I was her mother, not a stepping stone. But there was nothing. Just her last message, still unopened. "You've made your point. I hope you're happy." I hadn't replied, and I wouldn't. Because what I wanted wasn't happiness. I wasn't chasing peace or revenge. What I wanted was dignity. And that, I was starting to learn, came quietly. No applause, no acknowledgement. Just the stillness after you stop begging to be seen. Carol called around 9. "Unpacked yet?" "Not even close." She paused. "Want me to come by?" I almost said yes. Instead, I stared out at the empty street and said, "No, not yet. I need to sit with it first." "You okay?" I considered lying, but the truth slipped out too easily. "I don't know." That was the truth. I didn't know what I was feeling. I didn't know what to do with the strange emptiness in my chest that wasn't quite pain, but not peace either. It was something else. Like the air right before a storm. After we hung up, I opened a box labeled Office and pulled out the file folder I'd avoided for days. Legal papers, my updated will, letters from Carl, the name of the scholarship fund I was creating, the Grace Fund, named after my mother, who once worked 3 jobs to raise 4 kids, who taught me how to sew a hem and hold my head high. She died with nothing to her name but a recipe box and a gold locket no one in the family wanted. I kept both. Now, her name would live again, carved into something lasting. I flipped through the documents. Beneficiaries removed. Funds reassigned. The will was final now. Olivia would get nothing. No inheritance. No property. No assets. I hadn't done it to hurt her. I'd done it because giving to someone who saw me as a burden felt like feeding a fire that never warmed me. The last page was blank. "Notes," Carl had written. "For anything you want to say." I picked up a pen. "To Olivia," I wrote. "This isn't punishment. It's protection. For me." I didn't write anything else. I spent the afternoon unpacking. I started with the kitchen, lined the drawers, stacked the plates, found a place for the good tea. I moved slower than I needed to, because speed felt disrespectful somehow, like rushing through the last chapter of a book you didn't really read. Every object had a story, a memory, a moment it had mattered. I wanted to honor that before I tucked it into a new life. By early evening, the place was livable. Not home, not yet, but livable. I made myself dinner, soup from a box and toast, and sat on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The sunset looked different here. Softer. Less dramatic than the city. More honest. As I sipped my tea, a notification lit up my screen. Olivia, again. This time, no words. Just a photo. It was a childhood picture, one I hadn't seen in years. Olivia in her Halloween costume, the fairy wings I'd stayed up all night sewing glued awkwardly to her back. She was smiling. Tom was behind her, holding her hand steady so she wouldn't trip. For a moment, I didn't breathe. Was it an olive branch? A manipulation? A memory she stumbled across and thought might reopen something that had already closed? I didn't know. But I stared at it for a long time, the way you stare at something in a museum behind glass. Not because you want it back, but because it once mattered. Deeply. I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and whispered to the wind. I remember that day. And for the first time since she'd asked me to disappear, I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because I knew it no longer owned me. The next few days passed like quiet waves, one folding into the next with no real urgency. I unpacked more boxes, found homes for the things I'd decided to carry with me, and let go of the guilt that came with every object I'd left behind. A chipped mug Tom used to drink from. The cracked vase Olivia had made me in kindergarten. A drawer full of things that used to mean something. Now they were someone else's clutter. The new condo had begun to settle around me, like a soft coat you're not sure fits yet. Some corners still echoed, but others already felt lived in. I'd started making breakfast again, real ones, not just toast. Scrambled eggs, fruit. A small candle lit at the table, even if no one else was there to see it. One afternoon, I walked to the market a few blocks away, past neighbors I didn't know, and sidewalks that hadn't yet memorized the rhythm of my steps. I bought plums, bread, and a bottle of wine I wouldn't have splurged on before. It felt strangely defiant, that bottle. Like a small protest against a lifetime of saving things for other people. When I got home, there was another message waiting for me. Olivia again. You didn't have to do all this. We could have worked something out. As if there had been a negotiation. As if I'd somehow misunderstood her polite coup. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I had spent too many years crafting answers to questions no one really asked. She didn't want to understand. She wanted to rewind time and pretend I'd agreed. That night, I poured myself a glass of that wine and sat on the balcony, the bottle still uncorked beside me. I thought of the photo she'd sent. Her in the fairy wings. Tom holding her steady. He would have hated all of this. Not because I sold the apartment, but because it had come to this. The distance, the silence, the slow unspooling of a bond we both believed would be unbreakable. He used to say Olivia had my eyes but his stubbornness. Maybe that's why she always needed to win. Maybe that's why I had always let her. Until now. Carol dropped by the next day, unannounced. She didn't bring food this time, just a bag of books and a look on her face I hadn't seen since the funeral. You're trending, she said, dropping onto the couch. I blinked. What? She pulled out her phone and showed me the screen. A video. Olivia, standing in a sunlit room I didn't recognize. Maybe their apartment, maybe a friend's. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. Sometimes parents just stop showing up. They pull away when you need them most. And then one day, they're gone. Emotionally, financially. Just gone. I watched in silence as thousands of likes crawled across the screen, heart emojis and sad faces, and strangers telling her she was brave, strong, resilient. Words that once belonged to me. She's painting herself the victim, Carol said. No mention of the apartment. No mention of the ask. I turned the phone over. It didn't surprise me. Olivia had always been good at shaping stories, sanding down the truth until it looked more palatable. She'd done it in high school, when she crashed her car and told her father it wasn't her fault. She did it in college, when she failed her first midterm and told me the professor was sexist. She was good at the art of the half-truth. And I had been complicit, nodding quietly while she rewrote things to fit her narrative. Now she was doing it on a bigger stage. But the difference was, I no longer had to clap. Later that night, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, holding the locket that once belonged to my mother. I hadn't worn it in years. Inside was a picture of me, maybe 7 years old, missing teeth and smiling too wide. My mother had tucked it in there after a Christmas where she couldn't afford gifts, but baked cookies for the entire block. She never had much, but she never let herself be erased. I fastened the chain around my neck, looked at the reflection staring back at me, and whispered, I see you. For the first time in a long while, I knew it was true. 2 days after Olivia's video went viral, I stopped opening social media altogether. I hadn't posted in years. My account was a graveyard of old photos, vacation snapshots, and polite birthday wishes. But now strangers were tagging me in things, commenting, guessing. Some defended her. Some speculated about me. Others used my silence as proof of guilt. I read enough to understand what had happened. She had fed them the beginning of a story, vague and trembling, just open-ended enough for people to fill in the blanks with their own hurt. And they did. Parents who had disappeared, mothers who cut off daughters, families fractured without explanation. I became a character in a play I'd never auditioned for. But the part that hurt, the part that curled somewhere deep under my ribs, wasn't the strangers or their opinions. It was Olivia's ease, her performance, the way she blurred fact into fiction without even flinching. She hadn't told them she asked for my home like it was her birthright. She hadn't told them I paid for her college, co-signed on her first apartment, bailed her out when Jonah's startup failed. She hadn't told them I sold jewelry passed down from my grandmother to help cover the wedding deposit she swore she'd pay back. Instead, she told them I left, that I gave up, and they believed her. I didn't respond. Not to the video, not to the messages, not to the family group chat that now pulsed with forced concern and too-late questions. I let the silence grow roots. Because if I'd learned anything in the past month, it was this. Truth does not beg to be believed. It simply waits. On a Sunday morning, I walked to the little cafe down the street, something I never used to do. The place had wide windows, tables that wobbled slightly, and a quiet hum of life that made the air feel warmer. I brought a book, but didn't read. I just sat with my coffee, watching couples argue softly over pastries, watching children press their hands to the glass. A woman at the next table tapped my shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice low. "Are you the mother from the video?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" She looked embarrassed, shaking her head. "Never mind. Your daughter's story really hit me. My mom left when I was a kid. I guess it brought things up." I didn't tell her it wasn't the same. I didn't defend myself. I didn't say a word. I just smiled politely and went back to my coffee. She saw what she needed to see. When I got home, there was a letter waiting in my mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single page. "I'm sorry you're going through this. I don't know the details, but I know what it's like to be rewritten by someone you raised. You are not alone." No signature. No name. Just that. And somehow, it broke something loose. I sat on my bed, the letter in my lap, and I cried. Not loud, not shaking. Just quiet tears, the kind that come when the weight you've been carrying finally shifts, even just a little. That night, I found the box of old letters I'd saved from Olivia. Cards from grade school. Crayon hearts and shaky, "I love you, mommy" messages. Notes from sleepaway camp. Scribbled grocery lists she'd written when she played house in our kitchen. I read every one. And when I was done, I packed them away again. Not out of bitterness. Not out of anger. But because I needed to know they had been real. That the love I gave her once had mattered. Even if now it sat behind glass, unreachable. On Monday, Carl called with an update on the scholarship fund. The paperwork was finalized. The first disbursement would be next fall. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" he asked gently. "There's still time to reconsider." "I'm sure," I said. "I want something good to come from all of this. Something useful." He hesitated. "You know she'll challenge it." "I know," I said. "But I'm done living my life around what she might do." After we hung up, I stood at the window and watched the clouds shift across the sky. A storm was coming. You could smell it. But I didn't reach for an umbrella. I didn't close the windows. I just stood there, letting the wind touch my face. Sometimes, letting go doesn't feel like freedom. Sometimes it just feels like standing still and realizing, for the first time in years, that the world will keep turning, even if you're not holding it together. A week after the scholarship fund was finalized, Olivia showed up at my door. It was just after 6 in the evening. The sky had already started to fade into that dusky lavender I'd come to love, half light, half shadow. I had just lit a candle in the living room, something small and cinnamon-scented, and settled in with a library book and a bowl of soup. The knock startled me. No one ever just came by anymore. I knew it was her before I even looked. There's a kind of silence that follows your child when they carry tension in their bones. It's not loud, not obvious. It hums under their skin. I could feel it through the door. When I opened it, she looked older, or maybe just tired. Her hair was pulled back in a way that aged her, and she wore a long coat too thin for the weather. She was holding her phone like a shield, but she wasn't recording. Not this time. "Hi," she said, voice small. I didn't move. "Olivia." She glanced past me into the condo. "Can I come in?" For a moment, I considered saying no. Not out of cruelty, but because I didn't know if I could absorb more of her carefully edited heartbreak. I didn't know if I could sit through another conversation where I was expected to apologize for not disappearing gracefully. Still, I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like the floor might collapse beneath her. Her eyes swept over the space, my chair, the book, the candle on the table. She looked confused, like she didn't expect it to be warm here, like she'd imagined me living in a cave of bitterness. "This is nice," she said. I said nothing. She sat on the edge of the couch, not bothering to take off her coat. Her hands fidgeted in her lap, and for a second, she looked exactly like she had at 17, when she got caught lying about where she'd been, when she realized the truth wasn't something you could keep hidden just by talking fast. "I saw the announcement about the scholarship," she said. Of course she had. Carl had insisted we publish a press release for legal transparency. Olivia had always hated being left out of a story. "I didn't tell anyone," I said. "It wasn't about you." Her eyes flashed. "Everything's about me now, apparently." "Only because you made it that way." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I never thought things would get this bad between us," she said, her voice thick. "I was trying to build a future. For me. For Jonah. Maybe for kids someday." "You were trying to build it with my past," I said gently. "With my sacrifices, my space, my silence." She shook her head. "You're twisting things." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm finally straightening them out." She stood abruptly and walked toward the window. The wind had picked up outside, leaves skipping along the sidewalk. She didn't speak for a long time. "I didn't think you'd really sell it," she said quietly. "I thought you were bluffing. I thought you'd give in. You always did." There it was. The truth, standing bare in the middle of the room. I had always given in. Made myself small, flexible, convenient. So much so that when I finally said no, she couldn't recognize the woman in front of her. "I know," I said. She turned toward me, her face a tight mask of pain. "I needed your help, not your punishment." "This isn't punishment," I said. "It's a boundary. You just don't know the difference." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Olivia didn't cry unless it served a purpose. Instead, she walked to the door. "I don't know how we come back from this," she said. "Maybe we don't." She looked stunned, like the idea of an end had never really occurred to her. I wasn't supposed to say it out loud. I was supposed to be the one who waited, who forgave. But I wasn't her stage anymore. I wasn't her safety net. I was just me. "Maybe," I added, "we figure out who we are without the scripts." After she left, I didn't move for a long time. I sat there, listening to the wind claw at the windows, the faint click of the door lock slipping into place. I told myself I was calm, resolved. But when I finally stood to blow out the candle, my hands were shaking. I'd chosen myself. And even though it felt like loss, I knew it was something else too. It was the sound of my own life, slowly, finally beginning. The days after Olivia left passed in a kind of stillness that felt too quiet to trust. There was no follow-up message, no apology, no screaming phone call to tell me how cruel I was, how heartless. And maybe that silence should have brought peace, but it didn't. It hovered. It waited. It made everything in my condo sound louder. The tick of the kitchen clock, the wind hissing against the windows, the clink of my spoon against a teacup. Even the cat's purring felt intrusive. Some people think grief only visits after death, but I was learning it has other forms, more subtle ones. Like watching your daughter become someone you no longer recognize. Like realizing the version of her you loved most might have only existed in the past. I was mourning someone who was still alive. That was a different kind of ache, one you couldn't name without feeling disloyal. One evening, I pulled out the donation box I'd started weeks ago, before everything turned ugly. It was mostly old kitchen gadgets and winter coats I no longer wore. At the bottom was something wrapped in tissue paper, Olivia's baby blanket, the one her grandmother had knitted for her before she was born. Pale yellow, soft as breath. I didn't even remember putting it in there. I sat on the floor with it for a long time. The scent of lavender still clung to the fibers. I brought it to my face, eyes burning. Not from the blanket itself, but from the weight of the woman who'd wrapped her baby in it once upon a time. So young, so unsure, so certain that love alone would be enough. I placed it gently on my lap. I wasn't angry in that moment. Not with Olivia. Not with myself. I was just tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind that doesn't go away with rest, because it lives in your memory. When the knock came, it was almost midnight. I froze. My heart leapt, for reasons I couldn't explain. Not because I expected it to be her, but because some part of me always does. Like muscle memory. Like hoping the child she used to be would suddenly appear again, barefoot in pajamas, whispering that she had a nightmare and needed me. I looked through the peephole and saw Jonah. He was alone, dressed in a sweatshirt and jeans, looking less put together than usual. His hair was uncombed, his eyes were red. I opened the door, but only part way. "Jonah," I said, cautious. "It's late." He nodded. "I know, I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to come to." I didn't answer. I just waited. He shifted on his feet, hands in his pockets like a teenager caught in the wrong house. "She left," he said finally. "2 days ago. Packed a bag and went to her friend's place in Connecticut. Said she needed time. Said I betrayed her by coming here. That I took your side." I stepped back, letting him in without saying anything. He didn't ask for permission. He stood just inside the living room, staring at the framed photo of Tom on my bookshelf. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten," he said quietly. "I thought you were just being difficult. That you were jealous, maybe, or stuck in the past. That's what she told me. That you didn't want her to grow up." "She said that?" I asked. He nodded. "For years." I sat down on the edge of the sofa. "Why are you here, Jonah?" He sighed. "Because I think I married a stranger, and because I think you're the only one who ever really saw her." I didn't know how to respond to that. It was too raw, too late. "I found your scholarship announcement," he said, sitting across from me now. "I read every line. Every word of it felt like a letter you never sent. And it made me realize you didn't leave. She pushed you. I watched him. He looked shattered in a way Olivia never allowed herself to look. She's angry, I said. She always has been. She just learned to dress it up. Jonah ran a hand through his hair. I thought if I loved her enough, she'd stop needing someone to blame. I felt that line like a bruise, because I'd spent 28 years doing the same. He looked around. This place is quiet, peaceful. It wasn't, at first. And now? I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. Now it's mine. We sat in silence for a while. No demands, no accusations. Just two people who had both been erased in different ways by the same person. He stood to leave, but paused near the door. She'll never admit what she did. But I wanted you to know. I see it now. And I'm sorry. I didn't forgive him. Not fully. But I nodded. And that was enough. After he left, I didn't go back to bed. I stood by the window and watched the streetlights flicker. It was raining now, soft, steady, like the sky was exhaling. I thought about what he said, that I had written a letter without knowing it. And maybe I had. Maybe that was what the fund was. Not revenge, not retribution. Just a story rewritten. A name reclaimed. A promise made, not to Olivia, but to every woman who had ever been told she was less than her giving. And maybe, if I was brave enough, it was also a promise to myself. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It drummed gently against the windows, filled the gutters with leaves, turned the sidewalk outside my condo into a slick ribbon of reflection. I didn't mind it. I welcomed the stillness it brought, the permission to stay inside, to drink too much tea, to avoid people and questions and noise. Rain has a way of asking nothing from you. It arrives, it lingers, and it lets you feel whatever you've been keeping buried. I stayed in pajamas longer than I should have. I read books without finishing them. I opened the curtains each morning and stood at the window with my coffee, watching the sky settle into a pale gray that felt like quiet company. The outside world went on without me, and I didn't miss it. Not then. On the 4th day, the clouds broke just enough for light to slip through, and I opened my front door for the first time in what felt like weeks. I stepped outside, barefoot, onto the small concrete landing. The air was damp and fresh, and the silence was a little warmer than before. I wasn't expecting the envelope. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no sign-off, just words. You won. Is that what you wanted? I read it once. Then again. That was all. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I understand now. Just 4 words soaked in accusation, bitterness, and the quiet sting of someone who had no intention of seeing beyond their own hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I didn't even feel surprised. Because what she had written was not for me. It was for herself. A final line in the version of the story where I was the villain and she was the abandoned child. I folded the note carefully and placed it in the kitchen drawer beside the scissors and rubber bands. Not out of sentiment, but because part of me needed the reminder. Some doors close so quietly, you don't hear the lock until long after it's turned. That afternoon, Carol stopped by with her usual knock, 3 quick taps and 1 long one, like a child playing a secret rhythm. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She never did. "Have you eaten?" she asked, already unloading groceries from a reusable bag. Tomatoes, a loaf of bread, fresh basil in a little plastic pot. I shook my head. "Just coffee." "Well, then you're in luck." She handed me a knife. "You slice, I stir." We worked in tandem like we had for years. We didn't need to talk to fill the space. But eventually, she broke the quiet. "I saw Jonah last night." I looked up. He was at the co-op, buying candles and bottled water like the world was ending. I smiled faintly. Maybe it is. She leaned her elbows on the counter. He told me Olivia's still gone. No contact, no plans, just gone. I nodded. I didn't feel triumphant, just exhausted. She left him before he could leave her, I said. It's her pattern. Carol didn't disagree. The soup simmered, and we sat at the table, tearing bread into small pieces. There was something comforting about it. Soup on a cold day, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the air, a friend who didn't ask you to perform your pain. After lunch, we moved to the living room. She curled into the chair with her tea. I sat on the couch with a blanket over my knees, the soft hum of the radiator pulsing beneath us. She's going to come back eventually, Carol said. They always do, when they've run out of places that will lie to them. I know. What will you do then? I didn't answer right away. I looked at the candle on the windowsill, the one Tom had bought at a street market in Rome. We'd carried it all the way back in our suitcase wrapped in socks. It still smelled faintly of sandalwood and summer. I think I'll listen, I said finally. But I won't bend. Not anymore. Carol looked at me like she wanted to say something but decided against it. Instead, she reached out and took my hand. You've come a long way, Sue. I nodded. Later, after she'd gone and the dishes were drying on the rack, I sat down at my desk and opened a blank page on my laptop. I stared at the blinking cursor and typed 3 words. This is mine. It wasn't a title. It wasn't the start of a letter. It was a declaration. Not to Olivia. Not to Jonah. To myself. I had spent decades giving myself away in pieces. In lunchboxes and field trip slips, in college tuition and wedding deposits, in unspoken forgiveness and quiet sacrifices no one tallied. I had given love the way a well gives water, freely, even when the drought comes. But now, I was learning to hold something back, to save something, not out of spite, not out of selfishness, but because I had earned it. My peace, my space, my story. And this time, no one else would get to write it for me. Winter arrived like an apology, slow, cold, and quieter than expected. The first snow came in the early hours of a Saturday morning, dusting the trees and sidewalks in a thin, delicate layer of white. I watched it from my window, a cup of tea warming my hands, the steam rising like breath I hadn't yet exhaled. There was something peaceful about the way the world softened under snow. Like maybe it was trying, just a little, to start over too. The days had taken on a new rhythm. I woke early, even when I didn't need to, and moved through my mornings without rush. I started cooking again, for no one but myself. Soups, mostly. Roasted vegetables. Dishes Tom used to love, now made just for the comfort of the smell. Sometimes I played music, Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, soft voices that understood sadness without letting it drown you. And sometimes, I just let the silence be. It was a different kind of quiet now. Not the aching, heavy kind that pressed against your ribs and made the walls feel closer. This silence was expansive, alive, a space I could stretch out in without needing to be anything for anyone. I didn't hear from Olivia again. Not a call, not a message, not a second envelope. The silence between us had hardened into something permanent, and I no longer waited for it to crack. I had stopped checking my phone out of habit. I had stopped imagining what her voice would sound like if it finally softened. Some losses don't feel like a sudden fall. They feel like a slow fade, like watching a shoreline disappear, tide by tide, until all that's left is the memory of how close it once was. One morning, I took the box of family photos from the hall closet and carried it to the living room. I hadn't looked through it since I left the apartment. It was mostly unsorted, albums with brittle pages, envelopes full of prints, stacks of Polaroids curled at the edges. I spread them out on the floor and sat cross-legged among them, my knees cracking in protest. Tom's face stared back at me from dozens of frames, always smiling, always steady. Olivia, younger than memory, wearing pigtails and gap-toothed grins, holding birthday balloons, or posing beside science fair posters. Us together, at beaches, in hospital rooms, on roller coasters I'd ridden only for her. Moments captured because I thought they would matter forever. I traced one with my finger. A picture of Olivia and me on a park bench. She must have been 10. She was mid-laugh, her head thrown back, my arm around her shoulders. I remembered that day. The wind, the ice cream, the way she'd leaned into me without thinking twice. I felt the tears rise, but didn't fight them. I let them come, soft and slow. Not grief. Not quite. Just a letting go of something I hadn't known I was still holding. The next day, I brought the photos to the community center. Since finalizing the scholarship, I had started volunteering there, tutoring GED students, helping with resumes, reading aloud to seniors whose eyesight had begun to betray them. It gave my days shape. It gave me people to care for in ways that didn't ask me to disappear. In the hallway, a young woman named Denise was decorating the bulletin board with construction paper snowflakes. She smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Callahan, you're early." "I had too much tea," I said. "Thought I'd be useful." "Always," she said, and her smile didn't have an edge. I offered her the box. "These are from my life. I thought maybe they could help someone learn storytelling, visual prompts, or memory writing." She lifted the lid, her eyes widening at the photos. "These are beautiful." "They're real," I said. "Messy and full of love." She nodded. "Those are the best kind." Later that afternoon, as I was leaving, I passed the new flyer taped to the front window. It read, "The Grace Fund, applications open." Below it, in smaller text, it said, "For women starting over. For women rediscovering their worth. For women who choose themselves." I stood there longer than I meant to, reading the words again and again. They felt like a prayer, a promise, not just to the women who would apply, but to the woman I had once been, the one who stayed too long, gave too much, forgot her own name in someone else's mouth. When I got home, I lit a candle and placed it beside the photo of me and Olivia on the bench. Not out of longing, but out of gratitude. That once there had been love. That once I had given it freely. And that now, finally, I had given some to myself. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, just as I was taking banana bread out of the oven. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, but something about the area code felt familiar, close, like a breath at the back of my neck. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and let it ring twice more before picking up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then her voice, quieter than I remembered. "Mom, it's me." I didn't speak. Not right away. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, my chest hollowed out by something I couldn't name. I don't know why I'm calling," she said quickly, like she had to get the words out before they betrayed her. "I guess I've been thinking." I leaned against the counter. The scent of cinnamon and warm sugar filled the air, but it didn't comfort me. "I got the envelope," I said. "The letter." Another pause. "Yeah," she whispered. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "You meant it exactly how it sounded." She didn't argue. Outside, the wind pushed against the window, gentle but persistent. Somewhere, a car alarm chirped once, and then went silent again. "I'm not calling to fight," she said. "I'm not even sure if I should be calling. But Jonah's gone. He moved back to Chicago, and everything's different now." I closed my eyes. I could hear it in her voice that she was lost, that the ground beneath her had shifted too far to find her footing. "I don't know who I am without him," she admitted, "and without you." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an apology. It was just a small, unraveling truth. I wanted to reach through the phone and take her hand like I used to. I wanted to hold her the way I did when she was 8 and afraid of thunderstorms. But she wasn't 8 anymore, and I wasn't the same mother she remembered. "I think," I said carefully, "you need to figure that out for yourself." "I'm trying," she said. "I'm in therapy. I've been going for a few weeks now. She's the one who told me to call, to start with what I've broken." I turned off the oven light and sat down at the kitchen table. My hands were shaking, but I didn't know if it was relief or fear. "You didn't just break something," I said. "You walked away from it while it was still bleeding." Her breath caught. I heard it, small, sharp. "I know," she said. "I think about it every day." I believed her, but it didn't make the wound close. "I'm not ready to have a relationship," I told her, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm willing to talk, as equals, not as mother and daughter, not as savior and saved." She was quiet again. Then, "That's fair." We didn't say goodbye, not formally. She said, "Thank you," and I said, "Take care." And then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the banana bread, now cooling on the rack like none of this had happened. It was a beginning, a slow, tentative one. But this time, it would be on my terms. I didn't call her back the next day. There was a time when I would have, when a sliver of vulnerability from Olivia was enough to make me rush in with bandages and forgiveness, stitching up the silence between us before it could finish saying what it needed to. But I've learned that not every wound needs closing right away. Some are meant to breathe first. Instead, I went about my day. I did the dishes slowly, letting the warm water ease the stiffness in my hands. I returned a library book I hadn't finished and borrowed another I probably wouldn't. I bought fresh tulips from the corner stand, even though I knew they wouldn't last a week. For once, I didn't need anything to last. I just wanted to enjoy it while it was here. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen in hand and a blank page in front of me. I'd started writing again, not for anyone else, not even with the intention of finishing, but because it helped clear the fog in my chest. I wrote memories in fragments, like beads on a string I wasn't sure how to tie. Olivia learning to ride her bike, knees skinned, cheeks flushed. Tom singing to himself in the garage, off-key but happy. The day we closed on the apartment. I cried in the elevator and said it was just allergies. These weren't just memories. They were proofs. That I had loved, that I had given, that my life had been full even if it hadn't been fair. Somewhere between the second and third paragraph, my phone buzzed. A message. Just wanted to say thank you. I know I wasn't ready before, but I want to be now, whatever that means. I stared at the screen, rereading the words until the meaning softened at the edges. She was trying, clumsily, cautiously, like someone learning a language they'd once forgotten. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know what to say. The truth is, I was scared. Scared that she would slip back into the version of herself that believed my love was a resource to be managed, not a relationship to be nurtured. But I was also scared that I wouldn't recognize her if she didn't. I set the phone down and went outside. The air had turned cold again, but it was the kind of cold that wakes you up. I walked down the block, passing familiar houses, windows glowing amber with lives not my own. There was comfort in their ordinariness. People making dinner, watching television, folding laundry. Simple rituals, small anchors. At the park, I sat on a bench near the pond. The trees were bare, their limbs delicate against the deepening sky. A few children in jackets chased each other across the grass, their laughter slicing through the quiet. I remembered bringing Olivia here once, when she was 6. She'd brought a sandwich for the ducks, though she ended up eating most of it herself. I remembered how she'd run ahead, fearless, yelling that she'd name them all. I sat on this same bench that day, watching her create a world out of breadcrumbs and imagination. She hadn't asked me to watch her that day. She just assumed I would. And I had. That kind of trust doesn't vanish. It just gets buried under years of forgetting how it began. By the time I returned home, the streetlights had flickered on. I made tea and sat back at the kitchen table, the message still waiting on my phone like a child outside a door. They're not sure they're allowed to knock on again. I typed slowly. Trying counts. Just don't confuse access with forgiveness. Let's take it one conversation at a time. I hit send and set the phone face down, not waiting for her reply. Not this time. Instead, I looked around the room, this quiet, sunlit space I had filled with secondhand furniture and first-time peace, and let the stillness hold me. The kind that doesn't ache. The kind you earn. For years I had asked myself what it meant to be a good mother. Now, I was asking what it meant to be a whole woman. The answers were finally starting to feel different. And maybe, just maybe, they were starting to feel like mine. The reply came the next morning. Not a long message, just 5 words. Okay. One conversation at a time. I read it twice, then set the phone down and left it there. No fanfare, no swelling music, no magical reconciliation. Just a sentence. A single step forward, measured and unsure, like someone walking through fog and calling your name, hoping you'll answer but bracing for the silence. That's what it felt like between us now. A fog. Not the kind that swallows you, but the kind that makes you squint to see where you're going. I didn't know what we were heading toward, only that I wasn't the one clearing the path this time. She would have to do that herself. Later that morning, I went for a walk. The air had turned crisp again, but not bitter. Just enough to pinch your cheeks, to remind you you're alive. The trees were still bare, but the buds had started to form, tiny green promises curled against the branches, waiting for the courage to bloom. I watched them as I walked, thinking about how much of life is like that. Waiting, reaching, hoping you're strong enough to survive the next season. I stopped by the cafe, ordered a coffee I didn't really need, and took it to the bench outside. A woman nearby was reading a book with a baby stroller beside her. Her eyes scanned the page, but one hand kept rocking the stroller rhythmically, instinctively, as if love had taught her how to move without thinking. I watched them for a few minutes, not with envy, but recognition. I had been that woman once, half present, half exhausted, filled with more love than sleep. And somewhere between the feedings and the forms and the scraped knees, I had started to believe that being needed was the same as being loved. But it wasn't. It took me almost 30 years to learn the difference. When I returned home, I found a manila envelope tucked behind the screen door. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Olivia's again. This time it wasn't a note. Inside were copies of documents, court filings, a notarized letter, a list of accounts. At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw it. She had removed herself from my will. Voluntarily. There was no dramatic letter, no bitter commentary, just a simple sentence typed at the bottom of the last page. This is not about money anymore. My hands trembled a little as I folded the papers and placed them back in the envelope. Not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't. There was no blame, no accusation, only space. Space I had begged for years ago, and which she was now, finally, offering back. That evening, I made dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with garlic and olive oil, a salad, a slice of the banana bread I'd frozen for nights when I needed something warm and familiar. I poured a small glass of wine and sat by the window while the sky turned dark. Across the street, someone's television flickered through their curtains. On the sidewalk, a couple passed by walking a small dog in a red coat. The world moved around me like it always had, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was watching from the outside. I felt still and solid. My phone buzzed once. A photo. Olivia again. It was of the ocean, gray waves curling toward a rocky beach. The sky above was overcast, a smear of pale blue and soft light. No caption, no explanation, just an image. I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed to analyze it, not because I thought it was symbolic, but because she had sent it to me. A moment she wanted me to see. Not a performance, not a trap, just a moment. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. Instead, I finished my dinner and washed the dishes. I fed the cat. I turned off the lights and walked through the condo, touching each surface like it was a page in a book I'd written with my bare hands. Every inch of this place held proof of a woman who had finally learned how to stay. The next morning, I printed out the photo and pinned it to the bulletin board in my office. Next to it, I placed a sticky note I wrote in pencil. Begin again, but slower this time. At the community center later that week, Denise met me at the door with a grin and a clipboard. "I have someone I want you to meet," she said, leading me down the hallway. "She's been through a lot. She's looking for support. And I told her you were the kind of woman who makes people feel like they matter." I followed her to one of the study rooms, where a young woman sat at the table clutching a spiral notebook. Her eyes were tired, her clothes clean but mismatched, like she had grabbed whatever was available. But her posture was straight, like someone who refused to bend again. Her name was Clara. She had 2 jobs, 1 daughter, and a dream of becoming a nurse. I sat down across from her, smiled, and asked, "So, tell me what brought you here." She hesitated for a second. Then she opened her notebook and said, "I want to rewrite my story." Something in me caught gently. "Well," I said, "you're in the right place." And I meant it. Because here, in this quiet room with a broken heater and a wobbly table, I saw the start of something sacred. Not redemption, not rescue. Just 2 women, learning how to begin again. Spring came slowly that year, as if the earth was unsure whether it was ready to begin again. The trees held onto their bare branches longer than usual, and the crocuses peeked out timidly, like they'd been hurt before. I understood the hesitation. My days fell into a quiet rhythm. Mornings with tea and long walks, afternoons at the community center, evenings wrapped in blankets with books I never finished. I wasn't trying to be busy anymore. I was just trying to be present, to notice things. The way light pooled on the hardwood floor around 3 o'clock. The hum of the radiator coming alive in the early dawn. The way peace, when it finally arrives, isn't loud or triumphant. It's soft, like breathing. Olivia and I spoke occasionally. Not often, just enough. Our conversations weren't deep or heavy. We didn't dig into the past or sift through old wounds. There were no sweeping apologies, no dramatic scenes. But there was something better than that. There was honesty. Cautious, unvarnished, honest. One Sunday, she sent a photo of a bookstore she'd found tucked into a coastal town. Inside the text was one line, "Thought of you when I saw this window." I didn't reply right away. I just stared at it, letting the silence stretch in both directions. When I did write back, all I said was, "Thanks for remembering." And that felt like enough. Forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a daily decision, a quiet choosing, again and again, to not let someone else's fear shape your worth, to stop defining yourself by the people who couldn't see you clearly, to stand, finally, in the full weight of your own presence. Sometimes, I still hear her voice when I least expect it. Not Olivia's now, but the version of her I once held in my arms. The girl who wanted bedtime stories and band-aids, who asked questions about the stars, and cried when she lost her favorite doll. I mourn her some days, but I also let her go. I had to. You can't build a future while clinging to someone else's childhood. One afternoon, I was helping Clara fill out a nursing school application when she looked up and asked, "How do you know when it's time to start over?" I smiled. "When you realize you deserve to," I said, "and not a moment before." Later that night, I walked out onto the balcony with a blanket and a cup of mint tea. The wind was warmer. The tulips I planted in late February were beginning to push through the soil, stubborn and slow. A single bloom had cracked open, its petals curled slightly, trembling in the breeze. I sat with it until the sky darkened. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't miss the life I had left behind. Thank you for watching. Her story is one of survival, truth, and finally choosing herself. To hear more stories like this, click on the left and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You are not alone in what you've lived.